8 reality checks from the Viking invasion of Britain. Just what happened and who paid the price? Let's go. Number 1. The raid on Lindisfarne in 793. Historically, this is documented as a massive tragedy, an unprovoked attack on holy men. But let's look at the logistics. The Christian elite built a monastery on an isolated island. They filled it with immense amounts of gold, silver, and jeweled artifacts, and they stationed 0 soldiers there to protect it. The Vikings were seafaring opportunists looking for resources. When they found Lindisfarne, they didn't see a holy site. They saw an unguarded bank vault. If you leave a pile of cash on the sidewalk, it gets taken. The monks were slaughtered, yes, it was brutal. But as a purely tactical event, this was a failure of basic asset protection by the religious ruling class. They hoarded wealth while ignoring the material reality of a violent world. Number 2. The Great Heathen Army of 865. Before this, Viking raids were small-scale, smash, grab and go home. But in 865, the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok showed up with a massive coalition. They weren't there to steal, they were there to acquire territory. This was a hostile corporate takeover. Britain at the time was divided into several Anglo-Saxon kingdoms: Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Wessex. Instead of uniting against a massive foreign threat, the local kings spent their time betraying each other, hoping the Vikings would just eat their neighbors first. The Anglo-Saxon ruling class was so fractured by their own petty power struggles that they allowed a foreign military corporation to systematically dismantle their countries piece by piece. It is a textbook example of leadership failing its people due to internal greed. Number 3. The Danegeld. When fighting the Vikings became too difficult, the English kings, most notably King Æthelred, decided on a new strategy: paying them to leave. They called it the Danegeld. But kings don't generate wealth. Workers do. To pay this extortion money, the crown levied massive, crippling taxes on the peasantry. The poorest people in the country were squeezed dry to buy temporary peace for the nobility. And the punchline? It didn't work. If you pay an extortionist once, you have proven that extortion is a viable business model. The Vikings took the silver, left for a bit, and came back for more. The Danegeld was the ultimate regressive tax. The poor starved so the weak leadership could pretend they had a foreign policy. Number 4. The Danelaw. By the late 9th century, the Vikings had taken so much land that the English simply gave up and formalized it. They drew a line across the country. Everything to the east was the Danelaw, territory governed by Danish laws and customs. This completely destroys the illusion of sacred national borders. Borders aren't divinely ordained. They are arbitrary lines drawn by whoever possesses the monopoly on violence at any given time. The Vikings went from being foreign invaders to legitimate landowners and lawmakers simply because they swung axes harder than the locals could block them. The Danelaw is a historical reminder that property rights are often just codified theft that has been normalized over time. Number 5. King Æthelred the Unready. His nickname literally translates to poorly advised. He is the perfect argument against hereditary monarchy. Here is a man who was handed the leadership of a nation simply because of his bloodline, and he proceeded to make the wrong decision at every possible intersection. He alienated his allies, he relied on the Danegeld, and he continuously failed to organize a coherent military response. History likes to focus on the terrifying nature of the Viking warriors. But the reality is that England fell apart mostly because its CEO was utterly incompetent. A nation can survive a lot of things, but it rarely survives a foolish leader who has absolute authority and zero accountability. Number 6. The Battle of Maldon in 991. This is a story about the lethal stupidity of aristocratic honor. A Viking force landed and was trapped on a small tidal island. The English army, led by an ealdorman named Byrhtnoth, held the only narrow causeway connecting it to the mainland. The English had a perfect tactical choke point, but the Vikings yelled across the water, claiming it was unfair to fight at the choke point. They asked to cross the water so they could have a fair battle, and Byrhtnoth, poisoned by the elite concept of martial honor, agreed. He let the enemy cross. The result? The English forces were slaughtered, and Byrhtnoth was killed. The common soldiers died horribly because their aristocratic commander cared more about his personal ego and romanticized notions of fairness than about actually winning the war. Honor is a luxury that usually costs peasant blood. Number 7. The St. Brice's Day Massacre of 1002. King Æthelred, paranoid and failing to control the political situation, issued a royal decree to murder all Danish men living in England. This wasn't a battle, it was state-sponsored ethnic cleansing aimed at civilians who had settled in the country. It was an act of extreme cowardice disguised as national security, and it was a spectacular failure. Among the murdered was the sister of Sweyn Forkbeard, the King of Denmark. This didn't eliminate the Viking threat, it guaranteed its escalation. Sweyn launched a massive targeted invasion for revenge, which eventually led to the complete collapse of Anglo-Saxon rule. Using xenophobia and mass violence to cover up your own administrative failures is not just morally bankrupt, it is historically suicidal. Number 8. The Battle of Stamford Bridge, 10,066. This is the battle that essentially ended the Viking Age in Britain. The famous story is about a single giant Viking berserker who stood on a narrow bridge, holding off the entire English army by himself, killing 40 men with his axe. It sounds like a myth of ultimate martial glory. But how did he die? An English soldier got into a barrel, floated under the bridge, and thrust a spear up through the wooden planks, stabbing the Viking directly in the genitals. That is how the Viking era ended. Not with a glorious clash of swords under a thunderous sky, but with a guy getting stabbed in the crotch from below by a man hiding in a tub. It is violent, it is undignified, and it is a perfectly fitting, unromantic end to 3 centuries of bloodshed. So there you have it, the Viking invasion. If you prefer your history without the sugarcoating, subscribe to the channel and I'll see you next time.